The story begins with a 7-member family in which the mother was once a famous folk singer. But 3 years ago, her health suddenly deteriorated to the point where she couldn't even get out of bed. The father spent all the family's savings on her treatment. Yet Suwano's condition showed no signs of improvement. Even the children in the house had started avoiding caring for her. So a small bell was placed next to her, which she could ring whenever she needed help. One day Suwano rang the bell as she usually did. But this time something was different. As soon as the daughter Rini entered her mother's room, Suwano threw her food and began ringing the bell frantically out of fear. Her eyes were stuck to the ceiling, as if she had seen something horrifying. Rini looked up too, but saw nothing. She thought her mother's mental state was affected due to her illness, and helped her lie down before stepping out of the room. That evening, when Tony returned from school, he began combing his mother's hair like he did every day. But this time, he saw her hair falling out in clumps. Thinking it might be due to a strong draft, he went to close the window. But when he turned back, Suwano was staring at him with a strange and unsettling gaze. Frightened, he ran out of the room immediately. When Rini was told about this, she began to suspect that something was indeed wrong. The next day, she told her father that they should move out of the house, but the father gave no reply. That night, he was whispering something in Suwano's room, and Rini overheard the conversation. She didn't understand anything, but she was also scared, so she stayed silent. That very night, the sound of a bell woke Rini. When she reached Suwano's room, she saw Suwano standing by the window. For a moment, it seemed like Suwano had recovered, but as soon as she tried to touch Suwano, another bell rang. When she turned around, the real Suwano was lying on the bed, ringing the bell loudly. It all felt like a terrifying dream. But when Rini went to Suwano's room again, everything was exactly the same as she had seen in her dream. This time Suwano was on the bed, but suddenly she collapsed into Rini's arms and passed away right then and there. The next day her funeral was held. Everyone thought everything would go back to normal now, but the real horror was just beginning. That very night, another family member saw a shadow in the nearby cremation ground. At the same time, the bell was heard ringing again in the house. Even though Suwano was no longer in this world, when they opened the door to Suwano's room, they saw the bell moving in the air on its own. Since their mother's death, little Tom Tony had been living in fear. One night, while he was listening to songs on the radio, the sound of that same bell started coming from it. The very same bell that Suwano had. And as soon as he turned off the radio, he saw Suwano's old comb appear in his hand. Terrified, he turned on the lights, but everything went back to normal, and the comb had disappeared. Meanwhile, younger brother Ian and older sister Bondi, who had woken up at midnight to use the bathroom, saw that the picture of their mother hanging on the wall looked unusually frightening. Out of fear, Bondi covered the picture with a sheet, but as soon as the sheet came down, it had covered a strange shadow instead. Both of them ran away in fear. When Rini arrived after hearing the sound, everything seemed normal again. But now everyone understood that it wasn't an illusion. It was actually Suwano's spirit trying to communicate something. The next morning, Tony took Suwano's bell and comb and went straight to the cemetery, where he buried them in his mother's grave. Perhaps this would bring peace to her soul. Meanwhile, Henrik contacted Rini. He told her that on the day of Suwano's funeral, he had seen a terrifying shadow. The same shadow that was later seen in Rini's house. Henra invited them to his home because his father could control spirits using tantric powers, but Rini declined, saying it wasn't right to visit someone's house without a valid reason. A few days later, the grandmother, who had been unconscious and in a wheelchair for years, suddenly started walking on her own. When Rini returned home, she saw that the grandmother was nowhere to be found. She set out to find her with Ian. Just then, they heard Bondi scream. When Rini arrived, she saw Bondi pointing toward the well. As Rini looked into the well, she saw her grandmother's dead body floating inside. With the villagers' help, they performed the funeral rites. After this incident, Bondi went into shock and began to ramble. When Rini went into the grandmother's room, she found a letter meant to be sent to a man named Budiman, meaning wise man. Rini thought this man might know some secrets. Rini and Henra went to the address, which led to an old apartment in the city. When they opened the door, standing there was Budiman himself. He revealed that he and Rini's grandmother were childhood friends, but couldn't stay together. Budiman was knowledgeable about mysterious cases. He explained that Rini's mother's illness began when she performed a tantric worship ritual. As a result of that ritual, she did become the mother of 4 children. But during the worship, a deal had been made with an evil spirit. In the end, the wise man gave Rini an old magazine, in which he had written about all these incidents. Perhaps it could help her uncover the truth and find a solution. When Rini returned from the city, she began reading the magazine she had received from an old tantric. It described a mysterious cult that worshipped demonic powers and granted its followers the ability to conceive children quickly. But there was a condition. When the youngest child in any family turned 7, they had to be sacrificed to the demon. Rini's mother wanted to break this horrifying tradition. So whenever one child turned 6, she would give birth to another in order to change the youngest child and delay the sacrifice. But this tactic was against the terms of that superstitious pact. As a result, Suwano, the mother, became so ill she couldn't even get out of bed. And now the 4th child had become the demon's next target. The most terrifying part was that the 4th child's birthday was only 3 days away. Rini refused to believe any of it. But then another strange event occurred. At midnight, her little brother Ian was going to the bathroom when someone knocked on the door. Hesitantly, he opened it, only to see their dead mother standing outside. He tried to run, but his kurta got caught on a nail in the wall. Thankfully, it was just a hallucination. Still, the fear was so intense that Ian spent the entire night curled up inside an old box. That same night, Rini was praying in front of Grandma's photo, but she felt like someone was staring at her. When she turned around, there was nothing there. But just a moment later, a shadow appeared right in front of her. Rini screamed and decided it was no longer safe to stay in the house. Not even for a moment. All the siblings, terrified, ran to Henra's house and took shelter there. The next morning a phone call came. It was from the same wise man who had given the magazine. He called Rini immediately, but it was difficult to leave the children alone. At that moment, Henra volunteered to go. But little did he know that this would be his last journey. As soon as Henra reached the wise man, he was handed an important letter and was told that under any circumstance, it had to be delivered to Rini. Without wasting any time, Henra started heading back, but on the way, a shadow suddenly appeared before him. He tried to save himself but was hit by a speeding truck coming from the front. He died on the spot. When the villagers came to retrieve his body, the letter fell to the ground, which Rini later picked up. That night, as Rini was closing the window, she saw Henra's spirit standing there. At first she thought it was a hallucination, but then a force grabbed her hand and started pulling her. Just then, Tony came running and saved Rini. They were now convinced that something very big and terrible was about to happen. Fortunately, at that moment their father, who had been away for work, returned home. Everyone went back to their house with him, but the series of terrifying events didn't stop there. When Bondi took Ian to the bathroom, the door shut on its own. Their father broke the door open, but by then, Ian had already fallen into the well. Without thinking twice, the father jumped into the well and somehow managed to pull Ian out. One night, when the entire family was at home, some strangers appeared at the door. They seemed to belong to some occult sect. Their purpose for coming was to take the youngest son with them. As soon as the father saw them, he quickly shut the door. But immediately after, Grandma's empty wheelchair started moving on its own and was hurled rapidly toward the family. An invisible force created chaos throughout the house. The father and his 2 sons somehow ran into a room, but then both doors of the room closed on their own, trapping the 3 inside. At that moment, the main door opened and a terrifying shadow entered. Bondi somehow hid behind a pillar, but Ian was directly caught by the shadow and it began to drag him out. Hearing Ian's screams, Bondi, despite being scared, gathered courage and pulled him back. Suddenly, the terrifying force went quiet, and the doors opened. Now the father realized that something big was about to happen. He ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and rushed outside. Angrily, he warned the occultists, but they didn't respond. Instead, they scattered some red-colored seeds on the ground and left. The family thought everything was over. They immediately planned to leave the house. But while they were waiting for the vehicle to vacate the house, Ree saw those same red seeds scattered in the nearby forest. She didn't know that these were no ordinary seeds. They were symbols of demonic power. By evening, the truck still hadn't arrived, and then the electricity in the house went out. That night, when Ree opened the letter sent by the wise man, the entire truth was revealed. It turned out that little Ian was no ordinary child. He was the offspring of the devil, being taken back so he could inherit its powers. Those red seeds were guiding markers for the devil's servants, and Grandma had jumped into the well to die so that she could become a spirit and protect the family. As soon as Rini said that, the sound of the bell was heard again from outside the house. Everyone ran outside and saw Ian going with those demons. He was waving his hand, gesturing to them. Seeing this, Tony pulled his father back into the house. But now the dead creatures began to enter the house and broke through the first wall. As they reached the second wall, they stopped because Grandma's spirit was standing in front of the door, blocking them so the family could escape. At that very moment, the wise one arrived with his vehicle. The whole family escaped with him. 1 year later, the family was living a peaceful life in a new city. A sweet neighbor lady brought groceries for them every week. But they had no idea that the same red seeds were kept in that neighbor's house. The same symbols that could once again summon demonic powers into the home. As soon as Rainey closed the door, the danger returned. Sometimes the greatest fear in life is the one that cannot be seen. But by facing that fear, we discover our true strength. With this, the story ends here. Subscribe to this channel for more horror stories like this.